Welcome to Zon Canada. I'm your host, Jesse Betteridge. I have two guests joining me today. First is, returning to the show is Geoff Thu. Geoff, can you just give a quick intro to yourself?
Hey everybody, I'm Geoff Thu, professional shitbag from the YouTube channel Mother's Basement. I don't actually live in my mother's basement, that's a lie. I am here today with my lovely girlfriend, Yazy.
Hi. That's me. I am Yazy. I am a cosplayer. That's basically all I do with my time.
Yeah, and Geoff no longer lives in his mother's basement. He now lives in his girlfriend's apartment. So this episode is another retrospective on a series with significant cultural, history or impact in Canada, and this time it is Dragon Ball, / Dragon Ball Z, / Dragon Ball GT, all that stuff, all here in one go. And specifically, we're talking about the Canadian Dragon Ball experience. And I do need to acknowledge right off the bat that the Canadian Dragon Ball experience is apparently nowhere near as interesting as the Mexican Dragon Ball experience, where thousands of people gather in the streets to watch government-sanctioned live streams of the final battle in Dragon Ball Super. And then apparently strip clubs also promise to offer free lap dances if Goku wins against Jiren. I haven't seen all of Dragon Ball Super, so I don't know how that actually went. So no one spoil it for me, please. But the Canadian Dragon Ball experience, it's more like excessively long delays in episodes airing on TV, and 9 different voice actors for Goku, and inferior theme songs overall. Except Dragon Ball GT. That one was... That one wasn't too bad.
That one was a banger.
Here, I also want to point out, I don't know how you guys feel. Personally, I still kind of maintain that shows like Sailor Moon and Inuyasha, I think were a little more intertwined and influential with like the Canadian anime fandom we see now. Whereas DBZ, it was probably a show that pulled in better ratings, but like Pokemon, it's kind of like, a phenomenon into itself. I don't know how you guys feel about that, or how closely it ties into everything compared to those other shows.
I mean, from a VancouverCon perspective, I think that there was a pretty heavy Dragon Ball presence at every convention that I went to. That's because, that's in part because one of the main guys from Team 4-Star, Takahata 101, lives in the Vancouver area, so they went to a lot of cons around here, and that tended to increase the attention that Dragon Ball got there.
And I mean, all those other voice actors who were in the early dubs as well.
Yeah, the Ocean dub was around here, so it was just really easy to get Dragon Ball guests to cons. But I would also say that like, as far as what my friends were talking about when I was a kid, Dragon Ball was as popular as Sailor Moon, in terms of what people talked about. What would you say, Yazy?
I was pretty alone with my Dragon Ball-ness, which is funny because Pokemon was extremely popular, Digimon was extremely popular, but they just kind of skipped over to Yu-Gi-Oh! From there. You know what I mean? And that was everyone's like new thing. It went from Pokemon and Digimon to Yu-Gi-Oh! And they just kind of skipped even looking at Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z. But in things like conventions, we have the same kind of experience that they were like popular in that thing because YTV is located in Toronto. So they would go to things like Anime North and push their big shows like Dragon Ball and stuff. So. And
YTV really did push Dragon Ball a lot.
Yeah. They had entire full day marathons of it at some points. Just out of nowhere, they'd have full zone marathons of it.
Yeah. And they premiere the movies too. Sorry, we're getting ahead in history.
I felt a lot of the time YT was like scrambling to keep up with the U.S. phenomenon of DBZ. That's what the franchise as a whole always kind of felt like to me. But like Yazy, I think DBZ was always a bit more of a personal thing for me.
Maybe my perspective on it skewed just because like I had a lot of friends who really liked it. And
I have distinct memories of begging people to play Budokai with me, even though they had no idea what was going on. I was like, please, I just need someone to play with, I'm like, it's just a game where you punch each other, please play it with me. Yeah. No one liked Dragon Ball.
I do want to take this opportunity to point out that in the Japanese version of the show, it is supposed to be Dragon Ball Z, not Dragon Ball Z. And you can
We've been
clearly hear them
conditioned.
saying Zeto all the time. Unlike with Mazinger Zed, though, it's just too culturally ingrained for me to fight at this point. So I've just accepted it. I will call it Dragon Ball Z.
Even though we're all Canadian and we really should. Why don't we just all call it Dragon Ball Z for the rest of the podcast to annoy everybody who's listening to it?
You'll be annoying me as
well. Well, Geoff, you're influential enough that you could do that in all your videos, and maybe you would have an impact.
You'll just hear a distant bind of me hitting him every time. Dragon Ball Z.
So would either of you, I have a bit of an outline written here, but would either of you be interested in just kind of summarizing Dragon Ball in a nutshell?
Okay. So Dragon Ball is about this little boy who hit his head as a child and decided not to destroy the whole world. I'm missing some stuff. So he's
got a tail. He had a tail.
Yeah. So it started as just a story about like a little mountain boy whose grandfather died, meeting up with a
spoiled rich girl
who named Bulma, who's going on an adventure to find the 7 Dragon Balls, which grant wishes. And it's basically Journey to the West with a fun spin on it. And then over the course of many years and many dollars being funneled into Akira Toriyama's bank account, it's slowly shifted from that to intergalactic professional wrestling.
And fighting against intergalactic real estate speculators.
Yes! Yeah. Yes! Who transform into cool wrestling costumes for their fights. But I mean, like, it does basically become pro wrestling, I feel like.
Pretty much. And there's some androids, and Boo shows up and kills everyone, but everyone is brought back to life because death is meaningless at that point in the series.
Because they've got 7 balls that grant wishes, and it's just like...
Actually, there's
they're
these dynamic ones.
They're like, oh, these can only bring someone back to life once. That's a little too harsh. Let's make another set of Dragon Balls that can just bring them back as many times as we need to, but they have to go to space to do it.
The 7 Dragon Balls, which are supposed to be the central part of the series, because that's what the series is named after, you gather the 7 Dragon Balls, it summons the dragon Shenron, and he grants you one wish. It was originally supposed to be any wish. As he stated himself, no wish is too great for Shenron, but then we soon realized there were a number of asterisks beside that.
Many wishes are too great for Shenron.
Yes.
But, okay, so the other way that I could summarize Dragon Ball is how I think most of us experienced it as a TV show, which is a guy on a floating cloud goes to a beach party with a bunch of people we don't know, and then a caveman from outer space shows up, murders a hillbilly, and steals his son, and then he dies and has to be resurrected because more space cavemen are coming to destroy the Earth and take their magic balls. Because we had no idea what was going on in the plot of Dragon Ball when the first episode aired. It just aired the middle of the story with Raditz showing up.
Oh yeah, you're talking
Yeah, I mean, if you're old like me, you would have caught the BLT Funimation like 1995 dub of Dragon Ball. So at least you know who Bulma is. At least you understand, kind of vaguely who Goku is. Like you don't. There's certain things you don't understand when you jump in. Like, why does Goku no longer have a tail?
And who the fuck is
like
Piccolo?
who's this Piccolo guy that is on the tip of everyone's tongue? Who's this cat? And why does he sound like Harvey Fierstein? Like, it's stuff like that. Like I just mentioned, that dub is how I first got into Dragon Ball, the Funimation BLT dub. It was one of my favorite shows growing up. Like, absolutely. And having that gap between that really old Dragon Ball dub and Dragon Ball Z, which came a few years later, is one of the big things that fueled my personal interest in anime as a whole. How did you guys each get into the series originally?
I remember I was watching like Pokemon and a bunch of other stuff on the Zone, and they were talking about this new show that they were premiering that was like a big deal, which was Dragon Ball Z, and they had been hyping it up for months and months and months and months, and then finally they did the premiere, and I saw that first episode, or the first 2 episodes, because they aired them back to back, where Raditz shows up and then he fights Goku and Piccolo kills Goku, which is like a really big deal in terms of the overall Dragon Ball storyline. But for me, it was the inciting incident, so I was like, ooh. And then,
I mean, the main character dying in, like, at the beginning of the show is that's disarming, to say the least.
Yeah. So to me, like, Gohan was kind of the protagonist from the beginning. And then so I watched a few episodes of that, and then I was able to watch it on and off. And then my mom decided that it was too violent and I shouldn't watch it. So I wasn't able to watch it for a couple years, but I would keep tuning in when she wasn't paying attention. So I caught bits and pieces of the Frieza fight, and then I slowly pieced it together by watching different airings and stuff like that over a long period of time to know the whole story.
Yeah, mine was similar-ish. I mean, I'm a year younger than Geoff, so it kind of makes sense that I started watching Pokemon, and then it because it was airing before Pokemon, I just happened upon it, in like the beginning or the middle-ish of the Frieza saga, and like one episode, and I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I'm coming back early tomorrow, and then I was like set on it from there. But the worst part about being a Canadian and trying to watch it was the fact that YTV would run out of episodes, so they'd just go back to the beginning. And you'd have to watch it all over again.
Yeah, I remember that.
You'd get like 3/4 of the way through the Frieza saga, and they'd be like, oh shit, we don't have any more episodes. Back to the beginning, and you guys gotta crawl back up.
Yeah. And yeah,
I mean, maybe it was a season thing, and I just didn't have a concept of how seasons work.
Well, it did. I mean, that did happen in the U.S. as well, but nowhere near as much as it did here, because the delays kept happening even after the production had moved to Texas. Mm-hmm. For reasons I'll get into in a bit. There was always big delays in YTV being able to get the episodes. They were always months behind the U.S. As a result, and it kind of snowballed into some interesting interesting developments.
Yeah, that did the overall YTV experience for everything, though.
Yeah, stuff was behind, and like I remember watching Inuyasha, and they'd reset Inuyasha like 50 times. Yeah. But it was helpful,
for people to jump in,
or for if you missed episodes.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like I was able to jump in the middle, and 2 months later, I was watching Raditz, and I knew what was going on suddenly.
Yeah. I was like watching, like I missed episodes all the time, but then I'd catch them during the reruns. So I like watched Dragon Ball out of order, and I got the whole story, but it took me like 3 times through the airing to actually get it all.
Like you mentioned, you guys never really saw the original BLT Funimation Dragon Ball dub that aired in 96. For the next thing, I'm going to kind of go through the background of that, and then we'll sort of go step by step through how things kind of unrolled in Canada over the years. Dragon Ball, of course, began as a manga by Akira Toriyama, who had been known for Dr. Slump in 1984. Toei Animation turned it into an anime in 1986, and it was a huge success in Japan. Later, the second portion of the series, when Goku becomes an adult, was called Dragon Ball Z, which we all call Dragon Ball Z today. And at times it was insanely successful. It pulled in like close to 20.0 audience share ratings with some of the Frieza Saga episodes, which is insane. You don't see numbers like that on any show anymore. Not even like Sazai-san pulls in numbers like that. So, of course, there was an attempt to localize Dragon Ball in English in the late 80s. It was actually done by Harmony Gold, the company responsible for Robotech, and it was a gigantic failure. It showed up in very few markets. Allegedly, they had dubbed like 60 episodes or something, but it's completely lost now. I don't know if you guys have seen any clips or any small bits of this old Harmony Gold dub at all.
I have not, but I bet that it is hilariously butchered, and I would love to watch the whole thing at some point.
Yeah, I know they did one of the movies. They split it up into episodes, and that was kind of the pilot. They call Korin Whiskers the Wonder Cat, which is almost as good as having him have a voice that's imitating Harvey Fierstein. But yeah, basically it was for some reason Harmony Gold couldn't pull off the distribution for this one as well as they did with Robotech, and it was shoveled off as a failure and kind of put the whole franchise on ice for a number of years. But then suddenly in 1994, out of nowhere, there was an interest for some reason in bringing Japanese properties to U.S. syndicated television. And a lot of that attention was going to Toei's other big property, Sailor Moon. It's not entirely clear why this interest popped up at this particular time, but I'm willing to bet that it had something to do with Hayao Saban's success with Power Rangers in 1993. I think that may have kind of been the catalyst that got kind of companies looking at these properties.
One theory that I've heard about that I think is pretty compelling is that it had to do with the rise of syndicated children's programming blocks, and a bunch of companies realized that they could get crazy returns by localizing anime because it's much, much cheaper than producing your own cartoon. And fulfilling blocks like not necessarily Disney Afternoon, but everything that was competing with Disney Afternoon. It was
any kind of extra time slot where local broadcasters were willing to put some kids content. They could fill it with syndicated content
and anime was like the cheapest thing to do that with. You could bring it over, dub it very cheap because it's pretty easy to dub. I mean, it's not easy to dub anime, but
the way they did it was easy.
The lip flaps aren't specific enough so that it's not nearly as expensive as something that's more specifically designed. And anyway,
it's got low overhead. There's minimal investment kind of needed to get something off the ground. And so it's like in terms of getting a production off the ground, it's just significantly cheaper than making something from scratch. But the problem, of course, is that you're rolling the dice on how good your exposure is going to be across all these different syndicated networks across the United States. And it kind of just takes getting a good syndication deal for something to take off, but oftentimes there were more failures than successes with that. So with Sailor Moon, the other big Toei title, that went to DiC. But in the case of Dragon Ball, nepotism is what ultimately prevailed, because those rights fell into the hands of the American nephew of an executive at Toei named Gen Fukunaga, who had financed a very small production company called Funimation in order to localize this series for television. In order to actually get it made, Funimation teamed up with a company based in Vancouver for the dubbing and editing production of the first 13 episodes of the original Dragon Ball. It was not Ocean, as is commonly believed. It was actually BLT Productions. That company is best known for doing the prelay voice work and co-production on Reboot and many other mainframe properties. So they played a big role in just kind of helping Gen Fukunaga and Funimation, which was like this nothing company at the point, get things going and off the ground. I think they did the digital editing on the show as well. I'm not sure if that was done in-house at Funimation or by BLT, but I would think that at that point BLT was probably better equipped to handle that kind of thing. Because one very important thing that came about with this early BLT Funimation dub of Dragon Ball is that I think it was one of the first shows to have like serious digital editing put in place for, just for censorship purposes. We saw a little bit of it in Sailor Moon, but Dragon Ball is the first time we really saw that being applied to animation while it was in motion. So they were able to kind of keep up with that, or use technology that was able to keep up with that. So a fair bit of work still went into putting that version together. Did you guys ever see this particular dub at all?
No.
Nah,
No.
In Canada, it got a fair bit of exposure. We've heard stories about how Sailor Moon had a rough time in syndication in the U.S. It actually had nothing on these first 13 episodes of Dragon Ball. Funimation was only able to secure a very small, limited number of markets, and almost every single one kind of shoveled the show off at like 5:36 in the morning, where no one was going to see it. In fact, I would argue that in the U.S., I think only anime fans who were already aware of Dragon Ball and were actively looking for this dub were likely going to be exposed to it. But like with Sailor Moon, the series was picked up by YTV because, of course, they had a good relationship with BLT, so it was kind of inevitable that it would kind of come their way. And the show showed up on Saturday mornings in January of 1996, which was a little while after the U.S., but it for a solid 2 years, it became a bit of a fixture on their schedule, despite having a low episode count of only 13 episodes. So, another case of a show that kind of failed in U.S. syndication, but got a bit more of a life on YTV in Canada, because they were already playing that game that Toonami would get into many years later of kind of rescuing shows from languishing in syndication and exposing them to a better, to a broader, more consistent audience. So this early dub from BLT, in addition to the digital edits that were made, the music was changed, and also this is where we first see Funimation doing their early practice of really cranking up the contrast on the show and applying a crapload of digital noise reduction to try and make it look like it's not from 1986. If you look at this thing on a modern screen or monitor of any kind, it's going to look like complete garbage. But back on our old fuzzy CRT TVs, it did make it look better.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, despite the changes, despite the visual edits and the changes in music, it really did maintain the spirit of the original pretty well. The style and charm of Toriyama's work came through, and it was completely clear to me when I watched it as a kid. It had the simplistic character designs with all the detailed props and backgrounds, a vibrant color palette made even more vibrant by Funimation cranking up the contrast, and there's the general exotic appeal of something that at this point I could tell discernibly was Japanese, because I could, at this point I was about 9 and I could recognize anime typically. So it really had everything I was looking for, everything 9-year-old me was looking for in a show. And I have to point out, even with the edits, it was still pretty racy compared to other cartoons at the time. Even with Ren and Stimpy and Rocko's Modern Life. I mean, the first episode ends with Bulma hanging over a cliff with pee dripping down through her skirt, and that they didn't edit that at all. So a lot of the scatological humor was kept in. The only thing that was really clunky overall was how they handled Roshi, because we at this point I would assume most people are familiar with the whole no balls thing from episode 3. Now, Goku removes Bulma's panties and she winds up flashing Roshi at the end. In the BLT dub, it's the whole kind of situation has changed, where Roshi is just instead asking not for a date with Bulma, but a date with an older relative of Bulma who, ideally is somewhere over 18. So they were, they were being probably overly cautious with that. But yeah, that's the only thing that really came off clunky. Overall, it does capture the charm and magic of the original, and I recognized the elements that I think I still appreciate from Dragon Ball from that old dub. So nostalgically, it's probably the segment that means the most for me. You guys have, I assume you've watched through Dragon Ball. This dub covered the first 13 episodes. Do you have any opinions just on that particular portion of the show? Just the Pilaf saga?
The Pilaf saga, I mean, I really liked it when I did get to watch it, which was probably around the same age you watched it, around 9, but through the second dub that they did of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do really enjoy that story arc. They censored it a lot less in the second dub from when I remember, because I remember Master Roshi being a creeper.
So they actually, I think if I remember correctly, they moved it to a later time too.
Yeah, it was a later time slot, and more of the sexual innuendo and content was kept in with the Blue Water dub, which is it's one of its biggest strengths.
That was the first time my mother had expressed concern over a cartoon that I was watching. She didn't care about the fighting or anything. She was like, "That's pretty cool." But I remember watching Dragon Ball, and she was like, "Yo, maybe you shouldn't be watching that."
And maybe she was right.
Real quick, my strongest experience was the Pilaf saga. I didn't watch that religiously after that, because once they ended it, they restarted it.
Yeah.
And I didn't love it enough to sit through the restart. I really liked it, but I didn't Dragon Ball Z like it there. So when they started again, I figured, I'll just, go back to watching it when it's a little farther along, and then I never really did. I watched it sporadically after that, mostly because I thought Yamcha was cute, but that's about it.
Yeah. Yamcha comes off as kind of badass for about, a solid 15 minutes in his first appearance.
Well, I mean, he's pretty cool. It's just that
Yeah.
his power level never scales with anybody else's. So
Yeah.
He was actually pretty cool in Dragon Ball.
He's the toughest character in the show for a full 5 minutes.
Yeah,
then just everybody moves past him, and, eventually he's just lying on the floor. Yeah, so for me, I watched the Pilaf saga all the way through. It was on Bionics, I think, or like their pre-Bionics block, like between...
Yeah, around the same time.
Yeah, just before 8 o'clock. And I remember watching that at dinner. I really liked it because it had the charm of Dragon Ball that Dragon Ball Z had, but it also had like a sort of adventurous atmosphere to it that reminded me a lot of other shows I was watching that I really liked, like Rupert, and I was a big fan of like the Tintin stories and stuff like that. So that sort of like globe-trotting adventure thing was something I really liked and that I kind of miss in later parts.
It's really the only segment of the series that's like that. It's the only arc where they put any value and intrigue into the Dragon Balls themselves and finding the Dragon Balls. That's an aspect.
The world instead of just transporting there at the speed of light.
And each part's its own story. We'll
just have Mr. Popo go transport himself and find every Dragon Ball, because this is an emergency.
Yeah, I mean we're at it where like collecting all of the Dragon Balls is like the inciting incident of half the movies now.
Yeah.
Just like, oh, we got all of them.
I do definitely miss that, like, I don't know, that aspect of like the actually having to work for the Dragon Balls that they had.
They kind of brought it back in GT a little bit, but GT had other problems.
They went a little too hard with that.
We'll get into GT.
But yeah, no, I like that. Like each episode, they were going to a different location, and they had these villains who they were battling against, who were like recurring, and also there would be usually like a villain of the week of some kind. So that kind of reminded me of the Team Rocket dynamic from Pokemon, which I always found fun. And then, it got to the end, and I obviously knew at that point, because I'd watched Dragon Ball Z, what was going on with Goku's tail. But that moment was really cool. The whole finale was a really fun thing to watch for me, and I was into it enough that I waited for them to get through, and then I watched the Android saga that they played afterwards. And I watched, I think, straight up to the World Tournament before the repetitions really started to get to me, and I had to bow out. But that's a later dub that we watched.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw, I guess I'm a rare experience where, I saw Dragon Ball before I even knew what Dragon Ball Z was. It's something I would learn about over the next couple of years. But like, I didn't know Goku was a Saiyan. I didn't know what the deal with his tail was, or the significance of him turning into a giant ape, or anything. It was all, like, it was just all really surprising and unexplainable to me, as it was intended, at the time that it was written. One thing I really love about the Pilaf arc is that it actually has a lot of filler, but the filler is great. Pilaf, Mai, and Shu, they don't appear until like late in Volume 2 in the manga. Like when they actually get to Pilaf's castle, that is when those characters are introduced. But here they're actually like worked into all the early chapters, and they have their own little side plots, and they kind of flesh each one out. And I think it's really effective. They really round out the plots, add a different dimension to it. And it's a good early example of how, really, a good chunk of the franchise of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, at least for the first little bit of Dragon Ball Z anyway, it's really improved by the filler that Toei added to the manga. I would argue that right up until the end of the Saiyan arc, I think that Dragon Ball is generally better when it's viewed with the filler. Frieza arc level filler is a bit of a different story, though. But I think in those early days,
I'm a little maybe biased because all of my favorite stuff that happens in the franchise is filler. Like all of my favorite all-time episodes are filler episodes, like the driving episode.
Oh yeah, I think everyone
was in the manga.
Was it?
Yeah.
I didn't know
it was a title page in the manga. They turned it into a whole story.
Well, yeah. So some of my like all-time favorite stuff was that stuff. So I have bad opinions on fillers. So
yeah. So overall, this old dub got pretty good coverage on YTV at the time, though. It ran through all of 1996 to most of 97, I believe. And there was a toy line, apparently, for this show that guaranteed never made it to at least stores near me, because I absolutely would have seen those toys and known about them. But this line of toys even had, like, Krillin and launch figures as well. So, they were really anticipating that this original version of Dragon Ball was gonna take off. But again, it just wound up being another show that failed in U.S. syndication. But despite being, fairly successful on YTV, that just, Canadian market wasn't valued enough to keep it going. So production ended after the first 13 episodes, and maybe that toy line never actually came out. There's an ad for it I found on YouTube. But that really disappointed me as a kid, because in the coming months I would come to discover, because I knew that this show was going to continue, and I would learn in the coming months all about it, because I had friends at school who were from Hong Kong and some from South Korea, and like they had backpacks and stationery and all this other merchandise from Dragon Ball Z, which clearly depicted Goku as an adult with all these other characters who looked absolutely fascinating, for sure. And it was through them that I learned like vague information on what happened later in the series, like Goku is an alien, and he just the other villains he would face and everything. And it was neat to learn that stuff, but I had absolutely resigned myself to the belief that this was it for Dragon Ball in English. I would never see this fabled Dragon Ball Z that was that I saw on all this merchandise that these other kids had. Meanwhile, despite the fact that DB was basically a failure, again Fukunaga was not going to give up. A decision was made not only to jump ahead in production to the more popular Dragon Ball Z segment, but again negotiated a whole new syndication deal with none other than the man behind the U.S. Power Rangers, Hayao Saban, and began airing in significantly more markets in the United States beginning in late 1996. So, this old Dragon Ball dub was still airing on YTV when this was showing up in the U.S. And the number of markets actually increased through the next year. Unlike the BLT Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon, this Saban version of Dragon Ball Z actually managed to score some good time slots and was fairly successful. In fact, the first season was 26 episodes. It was successful enough to get a second season, which totaled to 65. And it also got a renewed marketing push. And that's how I discovered that there was some activity going on with this title back in early 97. I noticed the toys were showing up, and all these amazing characters that spanned the entire series were on store shelves, and I could see them all listed there, including Mr. Savage, who is a version of Mr. Satan that we never got to see, because they went with, of course, Hercule in all of the English dubs, which is something I never understood.
Yeah, it's such a dumb piece of censorship, I think, just in general.
I can understand it. I mean, you have to cater to the Midwest and the U.S. to some degree.
But Mr. Satan sounds like a wrestling name.
It does, yeah. I think that it's one of those things where if I think they had kept it uncensored in the dub, I don't think that it would have been even remotely problematic for YTV. I don't think they would have any issue with it. But it's just you gotta address that Midwest audience in the U.S. ultimately, and that's why they made that decision. And apparently they still call him. Actually, it bugs the hell out of me. They still call him Hercule in the Dragon Ball Super manga that Viz is putting out right now. Actually, it drives me up the wall that they went with Hercule in the manga at all, because it had been pretty accurately and it had been accurately translated up to that point. But when they got to Hercule, it was at this point where they're just like, oh, let's try to sync things up with what the kids are seeing on TV. And you saw similar changes in the Yu-Gi-Oh comic and stuff as well. It I don't know, that bugs the hell out of me. But anyway, I also saw a VHS of the first few episodes of Dragon Ball Z showing up at Electronics Boutique, and I didn't even know what to make of that. I was just like, how is this possible? Is this just in Japanese with no translation? Why are they selling this? There couldn't possibly be an English version of Dragon Ball Z. Within a few weeks, I saw a listing for it on KVOS, which is a local broadcaster out of Bellingham, Washington. And I tuned in. I didn't know what to expect. And there it was, this fabled Dragon Ball Z, which I now knew as Dragon Ball Z, as it would forever forward be known. And I watched it for the first time on that run, which I don't think even covered the entirety of the first 26 episode season. Production was actually moved away from BLT. It did The voice work was done in Vancouver, but they had moved it to Ocean Productions through Saban. They retained basically the entire voice cast from that original Dragon Ball dub. But more importantly, it retained 2 writers who worked on that original localization, Ian James Corlett and Peter Kalamis, who some of you might immediately identify as the first 2 English voice actors for adult Goku. And from what I can tell, they were really the vital bit of continuity between those 2 dubs. And I actually strongly suspect that they were the reason that those productions turned out as good as it did. So I know that these early Ocean syndicated episodes were kind of what you guys each first discovered. What do you guys think of this portion of this dub, of this portion of the series?
So I really enjoyed watching it. I like that part of the story a lot. The Saiyan Saga, I'm kind of weird. I've got a lot of nostalgia for the Saiyan Saga, maybe because it played on Canadian TV so many times on repeat before we got any other episodes. So I've got a lot of affection for the battle with Vegeta and all of Gohan's training, Goku's journey through Snake Way, all of that stuff.
Snake Way felt like it went on forever because they kept replaying it so many times.
Yeah.
Every time you'd miss a few episodes, you'd turn it back on, and
he's back on Snake Way.
I think that's appropriate, though. That's one reason why it's better with the filler, because you get you really feel how long Snake Way was, which didn't come across in the manga or in Kai as much.
Yeah, I just hear Snake Way and I have war flashbacks to how long it took to get through it.
The Snake Bathhouse was such a unique and cool episode. I don't know. They did have a lot of pretty decent filler in that part of the story. And
Gohan makes friends with the dinosaur gets killed. And they didn't.
That was fucked up.
That was one instance where they kept death in too. That was that was brutal, or I thought it was brutal when I was a kid, at least.
Yeah,
it was pretty brutal.
I thought it was the saddest thing in the world. Mostly because I was also attached to the cute characters and stuff. So
you love lizards, in general.
I am a crazy lizard lady. So I took that especially hard. I was like, this is the saddest thing I've ever seen.
But yeah, I think it was a really good dub, and I do distinctly remember when I tuned back in later, I was like, all these voices are different. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, when it switched to Texas.
You couldn't quite put your finger on it because you were a kid. You're like, maybe I'm just remembering wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I find overall that these Saban episodes, I think as an adaptation of the original, it is very poor. Largely because, famously, they try to remove the concept of death. For the first few episodes, they keep it in. Goku dies. They make that very clear. Mm-hmm. Raditz, they don't show his dead body. They imply that there's a dead body on the ground, though. Trying to, move away from the concept of death and instead shoehorn in this idea of sending people to the next dimension. Not just saying that you die and then go to another world, but you are literally using this laser beam to send someone to a different dimension rather than to kill them. Trying to remove the concept of death from a show where the central focus is death and resurrection, I think that ruins the whole thing. Really. Mm-hmm. It really does. And of course, compared to Dragon Ball, there was an enormous amount of digital editing, and this is the first time where we were seeing episodes actually being edited together. I think it was 83 episodes edited down to 65 or something. It was crazy. It was they cut so much out, and they left in so much. They still left in so much of the filler because, again, that content was worth keeping in a lot of the time.
But also because that content probably didn't need as much censorship.
Generally, yeah. Also, it's worth noting that there were some things that they were more okay with in the original Dragon Ball than they were in DBZ. Pretty much every shot of Goku's butt was kept in with the BLT, that old BLT dub. In fact, I think there was more Goku, kid Goku ass in that than any other televised censored adaptation to follow, for sure. But they were more strict about that kind of thing. And in this version, there were way more, very crude looking digital rocks ready to block, or to block the poor children from seeing other children's genitals and butts and stuff. But I would say that, despite all these edits, I would argue that as a dubbing, English dubbing production, it is very solid. The voices are distinct, they're memorable, they're well directed. the script really feels, I think, as strong as it could have been under the constraints they were under. The constraints the Ocean team were under when they were putting it together. And it's ultimately a very polished product. And it actually almost distracts you from how many of the story details you're actually missing because most of the audience hasn't seen the original Dragon Ball. I do get the feeling that, especially because so much of the same team worked on it, they tried their best to make it kind of work as a sequel to the original DB, but there's just too many details. Like, Goku can fly now. Like, why can Goku fly? Like, you just accept it. You ultimately just have to get thrown into the middle of things and hope that you'll get things figured out as you go along. But one of the big questions is, now keep in mind, this DBZ, at this point in time, where I'm trying to keep a timeline here, it's futile really, but we're at like late 96, early 1997, mid 1997. This hasn't shown up on Canadian TV yet. It's only if you are fortunate enough to be near a U.S. broadcaster that has the syndication rights to it. This is the only way you could have seen it in Canada. So the big question is, why didn't YTV pick up Dragon Ball Z as a sequel to Dragon Ball after that show had been fairly successful? It's hard to say exactly why, but it seems that a different broadcaster had instead picked up the rights, and it was Teletoon. Teletoon didn't actually launch until late 1997, though. So my theory is that they had actually just been sitting on the rights for the first portion of that year as soon as they became available. YTV was also involved in Teletoon at the beginning, so the thing about the Saban Dragon Ball Z dub is that even as incredibly edited as it was, the show was still way more violent than pretty much any other cartoon you would find on TV at that time. Like, significantly more, even with the concept of death taken out. It's kind of brutal. Or maybe not brutal, but it definitely seems really intense. I felt that way when I watched it as a kid. It seemed edgy to me, and I was actually kind of shocked when I found out it had been edited at all. Because I'll tell you, HFIL totally fooled me. I didn't know it was hell.
That's like iconic. I feel like the HFIL.
Yeah. I mean, they could have just erased the letters off of their shirts entirely too. Let's keep that in mind. But yeah, so Teletoon did get the rights to it, and it's possible that YTV turned it down because it came off as just being so much more violent than its predecessor. And it, tone-wise, it's very different too. Even though the violence is edited in that version, they really labor to make it seem more aggressive than it actually is a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. So I think that's maybe why the decision was to put it on Teletoon, because Teletoon, of course, when they launched, they had an adult block 4 years before Cartoon Network even thought of doing something like that. But the problem with innovating in the area of having an adult block is that you kind of have to reach for content. And a lot of the time you're going to put in kids content that, kind of seems like maybe adults will like this, but we're just really putting this here because we don't have enough actual adult content to run. And Dragon Ball Z was one of those shows. Teletoon shunted it away at 11:30 p.m. In their adult block. And to make it even worse, they didn't even license the whole first season. They only got 13 episodes. And they ran them into the ground well into 1999. It's a bit of a missed opportunity there. Dragon Ball Z could have taken off in Canada a few years before it did, but it just kind of got mistreated by Teletoon. It was a big mistake. Interesting thing to note about this version that ran on Teletoon, though, is that at this point I think we're all familiar with the Canadian theme song of Dragon Ball Z. That always aired on YTV and in the markets that received the later Ocean dub. The version that ran on Teletoon, it had the U.S. Rock the Dragon theme as well as the Saban bumpers that aired in all of its U.S. broadcasts. So they licensed this from Saban. That's one thing that really separates it from when Dragon Ball Z became popular a couple of years later. So like I mentioned, unlike the other syndicated anime we saw, DBZ was actually fairly successful. But unfortunately, the project still died because Saban decided to exit the syndication market and move their focus exclusively to Fox Kids sometime in 1998. But it wasn't long before Funimation found a new partner in the U.S., which was Cartoon Network. And it was about the same time that Teletoon's rights expired. At this time, it became an overnight success in the U.S., and YTV finally had an opportunity to follow that trend. And here is where one really crucial development happened. YTV got the syndicated episodes, these old Saban episodes, directly from Ocean Productions instead of Funimation, because Saban, they couldn't get it from Saban anymore because they were out of the picture. And it's important to keep in mind that Funimation was like a real shoestring operation at this point, probably more than you think. So without a partner like Saban, they didn't have the distribution channels, or really any distribution channels to speak of, in Canada, really until they were purchased by Navarre in 2005. Like, you couldn't even find their DVDs or anything up here until then. And it's also worth noting that most of the episodes distributed by Ocean had that, infamous Canadian theme song, which was composed in-house by Ocean. It actually has 3 credited lyricists, which is appalling. Dragon Ball! Dragon Ball Z! Dragon Ball Z! Dragon Ball! Dragon Ball Z! Dragon Ball Z! It's still a mystery why the show was made. It's probably, I'm guessing the masters that Funimation sent to Ocean probably just didn't have the theme song or something, and they had to make something in-house, or they wanted to be able to make royalties off of it, because the whole reason that the music was changed in Dragon Ball Z was to make royalties off of the music. That's a trick that Gen Fukunaga probably learned from Hayao Saban. I actually showed that Canadian opening at a con once during my Canada Anime Bizarro Wonderland panel, and one guy shouted out, "Everyone thought I was crazy, but it's real." And that was
the Dragon Ball.
It's like you're watching TV from another dimension if you haven't seen it before.
Like, when I first heard people talking about Rock the Dragon over and over again, and I think Rock the Dragon appeared in one of the Budokai games
Yeah,
too.
it was the opening for the games.
Yeah, so I was like, that's not the opening to Dragon Ball Z. Mm-hmm. And apparently I was the wrong one.
Okay, but I didn't know that until 5 years ago. That's when I found out I was talking to someone about, I like the Canadian opening. Mm-hmm. I like it in a nostalgic way. The guitar is really yeah.
Dragon Ball.
And I was trying to talk to someone about it, and they had no idea what I was talking about, and I was like, we had different openings?
Yeah.
That was actually 5 years ago. That's not very
The guitar riff is definitely cooler.
Yeah. I love Rock the Dragon. I think it might just be my own nostalgia fueling that, but I like that one a lot better than the Ocean one. For sure. The Texas dub. Funimation had to resume production ASAP because it had become this big hit on Cartoon Network. To save time and production costs, they actually did not send it to Ocean Studios. Again, they started their own studio in Texas, which would become Chris Sabat's Okratron 5000 studio, and recasted everyone in a move that would fundamentally change the anime industry or localization industry in ways that we could not have predicted at that time. This version was most notable because it was substantially less edited than the episodes before, and also the episodes were more in sync with the Japanese version. And also there was blood, which was kind of shocking to see on a cartoon at that time. And it's also something that Cartoon Network did not allow on other shows. They seem to make an exception for Dragon Ball Z on this. So I'm curious, what do you guys feel about, how do you guys feel about these early these early Texas dubbed episodes that kind of started showing up in YTV's schedule as they were showing after they had finally gotten through those syndicated episodes?
Well, I definitely thought the voice changes were weird. Yeah, I was like, this is different, and I couldn't put my finger on why at the time.
Yeah, I completely didn't notice that there was a difference, really. I in the back of my mind, might have noticed the voices, but I didn't, because I was only 7 or 8, I didn't notice any difference in the actual, content. Mm-hmm. Or I guess I would be 9 or 10, yeah. But I didn't really notice that kind of thing, because I wasn't paying attention to that kind of thing. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I and I mean, as far as the episodes go, I guess I did notice that it felt a little more violent and intense.
But I just figured that's how the show progressed, you know?
Yeah.
I guess I started to notice again around the Frieza thing, I'd be like, that's just how it goes. It just gets cooler.
I think that does highlight that they weren't fooling anyone with the way they tried to cover up death in the early episodes as well.
Mm-hmm. The other dimension thing. I just, when I watched that, I was like, oh, they're dying.
Yeah.
And oh man, it's interesting because that sounds so dumb, and yet when I talk about Yu-Gi-Oh, the Shadow Realm, it just makes sense. That's like cooler than killing people, I think. Trapping them in a hell dimension forever.
That was better thought out, really. It's important to note that even when the production shifted over to Texas, YTV was still receiving the episodes from Ocean Productions. They had essentially become the distributor for Dragon Ball Z in Canada. YTV was not dealing with Funimation directly. In fact, they would not deal with Funimation directly ever until 2005 when they licensed Full Metal Alchemist and Case Closed. I know there's a misconception around that there was some kind of dispute going on between Funimation and YTV at that time that was resulting in it taking a really long time for episodes to get delivered to them. That is completely false. I have actually received confirmation of that from John Rooney, who was the director of programming at YTV at that time, that it is completely false because they were just dealing with Ocean, and any delay that happened was due to basically having a middleman dealing with everything. And again, Funimation's a shoestring production or a shoestring operation. International distribution was not their forte at all. Without like another party helping them, without like a Saban or someone, their focus was specifically in the U.S. And it's interesting, you look at them today, they keep talking about trying to do expand internationally and do streaming internationally to the same level that, say, Crunchyroll does. They still can't pull it off. They're still like way behind the other companies when it comes to having an actual international presence. So scale back to 1999 and think of where they would have been at that point. They could get merchandise up in Canada, but in terms of delivering content, wasn't happening. They needed someone to help them out. And that's why Ocean kept their fingers firmly in this Dragon Ball pie for a while. And one interesting thing that happened, I wasn't able to get any more information on why this happened, but Ocean actually made some additional edits to those early Texas episodes, apparently for YTV, because some scenes were edited out in later airings, like Burger getting his neck stomped in by Vegeta, which is something that really took me off guard when I saw it on YTV for the first time. That was edited out in later airings, and apparently these additional edits were done by Ocean. Not clear if it was at the behest of YTV. Again, we don't really know. So they were definitely very active in their role as a distributor here. And that would factor in a little later when we got into the production of the alternate dub that was done by Ocean. Before we move on to that, I'm just curious, because this is the portion of the series we're on, the Frieza saga up until the early Cell saga. We got all the Texas dubbed episodes for that on YTV at that time. That's also the end of the Frieza saga. Also marks when the show moved to a later time slot to 8 p.m. on like Tuesdays or something, and they ran 2 episodes a week instead of 5 episodes a week, again, because it took them a long time to get their hands on the episodes. Just looking at the show itself, what do you guys think of just the Frieza saga in general, the episodes that this dub covered?
As a child, it felt like it took forever.
As a child,
it felt like
it took forever.
I mean, you know what I mean. Like as a child, it felt like it literally took a year.
Yeah,
it might have that.
It might have literally.
In Japan, it took like 3 years.
I remember the moment that I understood that narrative time is complete made up bullshit was the planet Namek will be destroyed in 5 minutes. 8 hours later, still fighting. Cracks start appearing on the surface. It's like, now you've got 2 minutes left, Goku. Oh boy.
I read the manga recently. I on the new Shonen Jump app. Highly recommended, by the way, if you're not subscribing to that already. You can read all of Dragon Ball from beginning to end. That's the best way to experience it, really. In the manga, the 5-minute thing, it was just an offhanded remark that Frieza made. Like, it was I don't think he actually literally meant that the planet was going to be destroyed in 5 minutes, but the anime ran with it and made it even worse by the fact that it took about 20 episodes. Like they took that as gospel, and it's kind of hilarious to watch it, because you have scenes where they're recapping what has, like, literally characters in context are recapping what has happened over the past minute and a half to start on an episode. And I remember, like, at one point where King Kai is saying, the 5 minutes are almost up, after recapping what has happened over the last several episodes, when Frieza first said this would take 5 minutes. I think there was self-awareness in that, though. Let's be honest.
To a certain extent. Yeah, I mean, the Frieza saga was like the worst point for filler for the Toei side of the production, right? Where they were running up to literally one chapter behind for most of the run. So they had to adapt a chapter an episode and pad that out with like flashbacks and stuff like that.
Made up stuff that wouldn't actually alter where they were going.
Yeah. And it's the hardest arc to insert filler into because it's basically just a bunch of straight fights that are all interconnected in one location with the fate of an entire world in the balance. There's no time for faffing about, but they have to constantly do random bullshit.
And it's just such an unappealing setting too. It's like Planet Namek is so bland looking, which may have been due to the show's budget and Toei just being notorious cheap.
I gave zero shits about Namek as a planet. When he was like, "I'm gonna blow it up," I was like, "Good."
Yeah,
like, I don't care about it.
Yeah, I mean,
as long as I mean, I was a kid, so I wasn't thinking of people. But
no, I kind of agree with like. Now I kind of understand the budget constraints behind it, but like Namek feels super empty and devoid of life.
Yeah.
It's
like a giant desert that has one building every.
And keep in mind, presumably the entire planet is like that. Like this is an entire planet. Planets are big. Like we lose sight of that.
We're only on like.
It's an entire planet the size of Earth and they've got a spacefaring civilization, and yet they all live in tiny villages of like 5 or 6 houses that
aren't even houses. They're just like rock igloos.
Yeah,
right?
the pods.
Yeah,
and it's weird that there are like no big cities on Namek or anything.
They just didn't bother thinking,
Yeah. Like, I mean, I need to read the manga, but I assume that there's a lot less, fighting in random locations and just flying over large stretches of water. It was impossible to tell what on Namek was like a lake and what was supposed to be an ocean.
In the comic, it's all pretty abstract, so you're not questioning this stuff as much. I will say that I think that Dragon Ball is like. I think it is one of the greatest adventure stories ever told. And I think that every negative criticism you ever hear about Dragon Ball or like any negative opinion, it is always exclusively actually just about filler during the Namek saga. Cuz like that's what people are actually talking about. And I agree with that sentiment. Like I think that Dragon Ball is better with the filler consistently up until the Frieza saga. The second they go to fake Namek, it's just like, fuck that shit. Just
fuck. I forgot. I like blocked that out of my memory.
Fake Namek.
Yeah,
God,
fake Namek.
The space trip to Namek was the most like.
Yeah, it is the.
I really blocked that whole trip out of my head. I forgot that was part of how long it was.
It was so boring.
God, it was so boring.
But they had to do something there because like
they took Krillin with them and they had nothing they could like do with him to make him interesting.
And Goku's whole story on his trip was just like working out in a gym for. I mean, the trip was like, I think shorter in the context of the manga story, but like it felt like they were in space for years. I don't know.
I didn't even count that when I said the Namek saga lasted, or the Frieza saga lasted a really long time.
Yeah.
I wasn't even thinking about that.
The trip to Namek feels like a different story, and fake Namek is like the nadir of that whole thing. It's just like, we've landed on Namek, and then, oh boy, we're gonna go on adventures to find the Dragon Balls.
I think that is the actual nadir of the entire series. That is the. I mean, at least like Garlic Jr., you can skip that, but with fake Namek, it's just shoehorned right in there, like when important stuff is supposed to be. I think it is entirely possible that I will watch through the whole Dragon Ball Z anime again sometime before I die. But even if I do, like I am going Kai when I watch the Namek
You're
saga
skipping
again.
fake Namek, yeah.
Like
even Garlic Jr. is not that bad. That's
Yeah.
at least like how does the cast handle fighting a villain without Goku there? Is kind of an interesting question.
It also creates the interesting situation where they introduce Krillin's girlfriend Marin, and then later on, his daughter is named Marin, so it creates this situation where he has named his daughter after his ex-girlfriend. Always a red flag.
I guess Toriyama was just, I like that name, I'm gonna use it somewhere, and then down the line he's like, this one, and they're like,
yeah, he was not involved.
Okay.
He had some involvement with the filler early on because apparently Yamcha playing baseball, which is a great moment when he's introduced in Dragon Ball Z. That was his suggestion. So at some point he did have some input on what was going on, but after a certain point, he wasn't involved with the anime staff at all, and it really shows. But yeah, I think Frieza's the best villain in all of Dragon Ball, up till today, because Toriyama has actually gone on record saying that he is literally based off of real estate speculators who he feels are the most vile type of people on Earth. So he actually represents something, unlike unlike Cell or Boo or even like Piccolo. Don't represent something the way Frieza does, and so he represents something that is real, and everything is just kind of building up to Frieza, and everything is built up so well. He's so menacing. He's just a really well done villain, and so much of the series is just built around that. So I think that's ultimately what sells this portion of the series, and I think it's why this is the portion of the series where people kind of get sucked in, despite how dragged out and agonizing it gets at points, because there's just that nugget of goodness hidden away in there, and of course that's the point. It's the critical point where Goku becomes Super Saiyan as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Even though that's drawn out,
Yeah.
Again, for filler purposes, what was a very quick and impactful transformation in the manga turns into 3 solid minutes of Goku screaming.
Yeah, and also we were still getting the Texas episodes for the early Android saga up until I think the first couple of Cell episodes, or the first few Cell episodes. This is when things started to get YTV started really falling behind on getting the episodes on time, and there were really long hiatuses. Were you guys still watching at that point?
Yeah, no, I remember they got up to Dr. Giro's lab, and then it just reset the whole thing. I was like, why? That's the most exciting part! And then we had to wait forever.
So for me, I started to get interested in other things.
Yeah.
That was the thing, is they started to air more anime on YTV, and then my Dragon Ball Z time started getting filled with other things, so it was harder for me to pay attention after so many resets. My parents limited how many things I could watch, so I'd rather cash that in for something that's not going to be the same episode 6 times.
Yeah, I remember having more options for anime to watch, so I watched Mega Man NT Network, or NT Warrior, or whatever that was called, and a bunch of other stuff.
Card Captors showed up around that time, Escaflowne, Gundam Wing. You weren't getting as much as you were getting on Toonami in the US, but, you were starting to learn there were other things. Anime went in other directions as well, and had other things to offer.
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking a little bit ahead when I said Mega Man, but you're right. Card Captor was coming out. That was on Teletoon, and I got so into Card Captor.
Yeah. Escaflowne was the one that started to pull me away from Dragon Ball Z. It filled my cool action quota, so I stopped. I didn't stop caring about Dragon Ball Z, but I wasn't running to the TV because I knew it would be the same.
Yeah,
and even though it was 24 episodes, it still came out faster. It still covered ground more efficiently than Dragon Ball.
Oh yeah,
and felt more substantial to watch.
You can't find more of a contrast than the second half of Escaflowne and the Frieza saga of Dragon Ball Z in terms of pacing. Yeah. So yeah, I think personally I fell out of Dragon Ball Z around the time that the Funimation dubbed episodes stopped on YTV, and it was mostly because my interest had shifted elsewhere, and it was just excruciating to watch. The delays were too long. It was taking too long. I had nothing to build investment on. Also, I personally think the Cell arc it's probably my least favorite part of the series. I know a lot of people like it. It's the marketing, it's the central marketing point for so much of Dragon Ball Z, because like the opening theme, the pose at the end is from the Android Cell arc. A lot of the posters and merchandise you find, it's taken from that era of the show. I find it to be like the most cynical part of the show, or the most cynical part of the series, because you hear the stories about how Toriyama was like, he wanted to do something different, but his editor kept making him go back and make it more like the Frieza saga again, which is why you went from these androids to the other androids to Cell, and Cell has different forms. Now it's a tournament. So I don't think he was really putting his heart into it the same way he did for other parts. And I know people will disagree with me on that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to disagree. To me, the Buu saga is way more tedious and hard to get through.
Yeah, I think the Cell saga is also the part where Dragon Ball Z just fully becomes pro wrestling.
But so to me, to a certain extent, yeah,
your mileage may vary on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
The Cell saga is also the conclusion to the narrative arc set up in Z at the start. Because to me, watching it as a kid the whole time, Gohan was as much the protagonist as Goku was. And because I had that framing device of this kid's dad dies and then he has to become strong. And they've got this sort of like parallel journey going on. And that's why part of the reason that I attached to the Cell saga a lot more and I really tapped out during the Buu saga is because Gohan has his like conclusion to his arc. He finally takes the torch from his father and saves the world on his own. And that feels like a really nice little bow put on the whole story arc of Z as I was experiencing it, because I don't think that original Dragon Ball had aired yet. And then the Buu saga started, and I was like, oh, Gohan's useless now.
Yeah, the Cell saga is like one of my favorites, but that's also because my absolute favorite character is Future Trunks. And he was so involved in that. But I was also like way more interested in Gohan as a character than Goku. Mm-hmm. So the fact that he had his moment to be the center character for like the hype part, like for me, I know he had his time on Namek and stuff, but that wasn't hype for me. And the fact that he got his like, Linkin Park AMV hype scenes was like, is so memorable for me sitting on the edge of the couch being like, Yeah. I mean, my all-time favorite arc is the
Saiyaman arc. The Saiyaman arc is fun.
Yeah. It's my absolute favorite.
It's great.
Cell comes in second. They're much different lengths and much different levels of seriousness.
With this general portion of the series also marks where the dub changed again on YTV. It was the Texas dubbed episodes, up until early Cell Saga. Then it switched to an alternate dub that Ocean Studios had started producing. I got a few things to say about that, but I'm curious to know, because I know you guys were still watching at that time. What did you think about that transition?
It felt weird again. It was just
but I also still couldn't ever put my finger on it.
Yeah.
The transitions don't really stand out to me in like my memory at all. Mm-hmm. But that's also because I was so obsessed that I didn't notice. Like I was the different kind of obsessed. I wasn't obsessed to the media. I was obsessed in like, I don't know, the characters, and like I was obsessed in like with Trunks as a character.
Trunks in his nice jean jacket,
but not
popping out of the top
but
of
not
his t-shirt.
His voice.
His voice.
I wasn't quite in. So I didn't notice these things as much. Mm-hmm. That's just me though.
Yeah.
What about you?
I mean, for me, it was like I know it felt different, but because of all of the constant restarts on YTV.
Didn't feel that different.
It was just there. It was hard to invest all the way, So like the continuity got broken up, and sometimes I'd go like a month or two without watching Dragon Ball, just because I knew that it would take for friggin' ever to catch up to where it was, and then have a few more episodes. And then, but by the time that happened, it felt off. But it had been long enough since I last listened to the voices that I wasn't like, oh, that's really different. You know? There wasn't, like, complete continuity ever for me from the Funimation dub straight into the Ocean dub. And I guess that kind of changed my perspective of it a little.
I didn't actually watch very much of this particular dub. Personally, I think this is a common opinion. I think it is a big step down. It's a step down from the Texas dub, which, it started off as a pretty rough production and, improves over time. I think that the Ocean dub was a step down from that, as we were hearing that improve at that portion in the mid-Cell Saga, and then we kind of jumped to this Ocean dub, which, brings the original most of the actors back for the Saban episodes. But, it doesn't have the same kind of polish, and I think a big reason for that is because, again, Ian Corlett and Peter Clemanis did not return for that portion, and also, they went through a bunch of different directors, who apparently was rushed. They also reused music from the Mega Man cartoon, which I guess Ocean had the rights to, and they were able to apply to it for some reason. It did not fit very well, in my opinion. There's a lot of confusion as to why this dub came about. This was actually bankrolled in Europe by AB Group. They own the distribution rights to Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z in France and a few other territories in Europe. And so there's a misconception that AB Group actually owned the rights in Canada. That's not true. Also, this Ocean dub was not produced. It was not required by Canadian law. That's not the reason this was made at all. That also shows that people have a really massive misunderstanding of how Canadian cultural policy works. This dub was made for Europe, because, similar to how we were seeing a lot of delays to Dragon Ball Z in Canada, the same thing was happening in the UK, and I think a few other territories that were getting the English language episodes. AB Group, because they own the rights in some European territories, they saw this as an opportunity to just kind of make their own version and kind of move in on that territory in Europe. And, these were very experimental days for anime dubbing at that time, so I think a lot of the rights issues were not as clear. But because Ocean still had their fingers in that pie here in Canada, and there was a little bit of demand to get those old voice actors back, that worked out very conveniently for AB Group, and they wound up working with them to prepare this other version for Europe. And then, so the delays that were happening between Funimation and Ocean, and the fact that this new dub would help adhere to Canadian content rules, and it was convenient for them. So the dub had already been, about, I think, 20 or 30 episodes in before YTV switched, and we actually didn't get the first few episodes of that particular dub. But it was definitely made under very strange circumstances, which aren't fully clear. But it was made for Europe, and then it just kind of wound up showing up in Canada by convenience. I don't understand why it is that this was faster, though, because this dub was actually produced. All the audio was made from scratch at Ocean Studios, and they actually received the video materials from Funimation. So it was the same video. They actually used the same scripts as well, with a few small modifications. They toned down death compared to the Funimation version as well, which they completely gave up with when they got to the Boo Saga, because it's futile to cover up death during the Boo Saga. But what was interesting is that the agreement they had with Funimation only let them use their video masters up until the last 4 episodes, because their argument was the last 4 episodes are when it flashes forward 10 years. So that's not part of the main story, so Funimation felt they were not obligated to provide materials for that. Now again, as I mentioned before, at this point, Funimation is still doing that thing to the video, where they crank up the contrast, apply a bunch of digital noise reduction, makes it look modern on your old tube TV. It looks like garbage if you watch it on a modern TV, but it looked good at the time, made the show look like it wasn't from, 8 to 10 years ago. For the last 4 episodes, what AB Group did, because they produced the French dub, they actually just took the French masters that they had, which created a big contrast. I'm not sure if you guys remember this, but I did catch those last few episodes, and they looked very different. They looked older, they had more grain, they weren't in terrible shape, but the overall effect was it looked worse than what had come before it. Did you guys remember that? Did you see that at all?
No, I don't really remember that.
Yeah, no. That doesn't stand out to me at all. I wasn't that serious.
Yeah. I'm getting super technical here. There's a really weird agreement going on with that, with how that dub was produced. Before I move on to like what that led to, what did you? I want to hear what you guys think of the Boo Saga. Just we don't have to talk about it too much, but
I have like really bad feelings on it. Like really bad opinions on it because. Like I said, I was younger and I was very invested in the characters and not as much in the story. Yeah. Like I was more interested in X character doing something than I was in, which is why I loved things like the driving episode. So like during the Boo Saga, I recognized the fact that it was terrible. It was like long and drawn out. And like every time you thought it was done, Boo had a new form. He just like kept pulling things out of his ass every time you thought that it was over, but like not in an exciting way.
To be fair, Toriyama was completely just making things up as he went along from chapter to chapter.
The best thing is, and you can tell, you can totally tell, but I loved it because that meant that they just kept doing crazy things with my favorite characters. I loved the fusion stuff. I thought that was amazing. I loved the whole dynamic with Goten and Trunks with Piccolo, and him also having to be their father.
Because their dads sucked.
Yeah, their dads continued to suck, so he had to take on a new generation of children.
Piccolo is the best dad, for sure.
He got his time to shine as best dad, and like I didn't care for the Kais at all. That was my least favorite part, was the Kais.
Well, you don't love like the lore of the gods behind the Dragon Ball universe?
Now I do.
Okay.
Now, that's the thing. I can actually appreciate. I thought that was like. I think they're pretty cool now. And Beerus is like one of my favorite characters. Getting off track, but at the time they were just so story heavy and they didn't do anything as characters. Do you know what I mean? Like they were like they did things to the story, but they didn't do funny things like make jokes and go driving.
Well, I mean, so for me, I really don't like the Boo Saga. I mean, I like the episodes in it where the characters are goofing off.
I like Fat Boo.
Fat Boo and Hercule's friendship is.
It is.
Oh my god,
that is the best. That is one of my favorite things in all of Dragon Ball. Is those two becoming friends. To me that's what makes the Boo Saga worth it, really.
Once they separate the two Boos and stuff is when it starts to like
the evil Boo and good Boo.
At first like that's so cool, and then he just keeps going with the two Boos and you're like, done yet?
So here, to me, it's the Boo Saga represents the point where Dragon Ball really stops having any sense of like continuity or import to its villains. And the fun characters messing around and having a goofy, just goofing around, the driving episode, stuff like that, does go up. And I think that that's what in Super people like. But the flip side of that is like every single Dragon Ball villain up to that point, Raditz, Vegeta, Frieza, and Cell all had some previous connection to Goku, where he came from, and his actions in the past had a direct impact on why the world was being menaced by those particular threats. If you go back to classic Dragon Ball, Piccolo has that connection to King Piccolo. There's a lot of connections to the Red Ribbon Army. And it makes Dragon Ball Z feel like a consequence of what happened in Dragon Ball, which I think at the point that the Boo Saga was airing, they had started putting out episodes of Dragon Ball on YTV.
Not yet. It was actually a little after. We'll jump to that in a moment.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I became familiar with that around the same time, and there was a lot to appreciate in all of those different connections to, the Red Ribbon Army and stuff like that. And then you get to Boo, and Frieza is, and the Saiyans are all this connection to Goku's past. And then, the androids and Cell, especially, are all consequences of his actions as an adventurer up to that point. The people he'd fought before. And then Bibbidi or Babidi, I forget which one. Babidi is the one who comes to Earth. Babidi is a random evil space wizard who comes to Earth to do evil magic, to resurrect an ancient demon that also had no connection to anybody else in the Dragon Ball universe. Yeah. And they kind of tack on the Kais who've got that connection, but they're also new characters who are only vaguely connected to Goku by the Grand Kai filler arc and his relationship with King Kai. And it just feels like from that point on, it's an excuse to have more fights and not a necessary consequence of what's come before, not anything that's really a narrative, you know what I mean? It's
plot-wise, it's made worse by the fact that I don't think there's any justification for why Boo was sealed on Earth, or just happened to be sealed on Earth of all places.
Yeah, he was just.
It's
there.
just a coincidence.
Yeah. I mean, we already have Goku and Kami by chance were sent to Earth, Boo was also there. Like I can tolerate one coincidence, but this is.
And how did nobody know about that? How
did
not a single creature
on Earth know about
How
did Kami not
exactly
know about
how
it?
Did Kami not be like, oh, I heard of this bitch? Like but also Super Saiyan 3 was the first time that I actually felt like it was stupid.
It is stupid. That's why you felt that way.
But that was the very first time that I had really been like, this is kind of dumb. And like they're just like, really? That's what's going to happen? He's going to scream and his hair's going to get longer? Nothing's going to like...
Hey, he also loses his eyebrows.
That's how he's going to win?
Yeah, he's just a big...
But like, he just does it. Like, you know, when he goes Super Saiyan for the first time...
It's a big deal.
Yeah, when Gohan ascends, the second one, that's a huge, like, it's a huge, like, catastrophic thing that happens. But when he goes to Super Saiyan 3, he's just stalling. That's all he's doing.
And it's the middle of...
Yeah, sorry?
It's the middle of, like, a fight with a random Boo form.
Yeah, it's while they're trying to practice their fusions. So it's like... It didn't feel like some monumental thing, like a giant power-up should have been, and I was just like...
And the fusions didn't feel that way either. Like, they were cool, but, like, none of them
the fact that they, like, hyped up a permanent one with the earrings, and then they were like, nah, kidding.
Yeah, we're erasing that, because... But, yeah, the whole thing with Super Saiyan 3, like, every transformation, like, every big transformation prior to that point, when they finally pull off the transformation, it's
like
the end of the storyline.
Yeah.
That's like the turning point that, like, okay, now we can take on this villain head on. Like they keep trying to move past Super Saiyan, but they've got that problem with being too bulky, so Cell can beat the crap out of Vegeta because he's just too slow, and then
Super Saiyan 3 felt like a party trick.
Yeah.
You know?
I think this is the reason why they've kind of retconned the forms in the latest movies and in Dragon Ball Super, because he has the Super Saiyan God and Super Saiyan God, Super Saiyan Red and Super Saiyan Blue. And, like, they basically just eliminated the other two in between. And I think it is specifically because they just kind of want to retcon how stupid those in-between ones were. Or how stupid the third one was, at least.
Super Saiyan 3 also looks really dumb, because he's just got, like, the really, really big angry brow.
Yeah.
And the like, long-ass hair. And then they ran with that into Super Saiyan 4, and it was
just about
not
to say,
good.
You want to talk about bad design.
We'll get to GT in a minute, I think. I know Geoff is just chomping at the bit to talk about GT.
It's me.
She won.
So Boo, I'm kind of mixed on it. I love the funny stuff. I love that Toriyama could be funny again with it. You can tell he was enjoying that part of it, but at the same time, like, the story elements are they kind of come out of nowhere. It feels like it doesn't feel organic at all. Death is meaningless. Like, people are, like, entire crowds of people are slaughtered, and Goku's reaction is, oh, it's okay, we can bring them back with the Dragon Balls because death is meaningless in this show now.
It's like we got extra Dragon Balls on the other planet in case we can't bring enough of them back.
It's ridiculous, and also the way Goku was brought back to life for the second time is complete bullshit. But, you know, who cares at this point? Yeah, I love stuff like Mr. Satan becoming friends with Boo. And hey, Mr. Satan was critical to defeating Boo in several ways as well, which I appreciate because I like Mr. Satan a lot.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately what they need is the hype man to bring up that spirit bomb. And Hercule is my favorite part of that story. I think that he makes it work because he goes from being like a gag character in
the Cell games.
In the Cell games. And I don't think he gets enough credit for what a great character he is. Because with One Punch Man, everybody talks about what a great concept King is, this guy who just keeps showing up and taking credit for what the main character does to explain why nobody knows that's happening. But Hercule was doing the same thing a decade ago. And I don't know, Hercule I like, but the anticlimax of bringing Goku back a second time, completely undoing Gohan's entire character development.
That's the worst part about it.
I hate Vegeta just going through the exact same lesson that he learned when he let Cell transform to his final form for the sake of his ego. He's doing that again, but this time he's more evil, and all of that is just really bad. Deborah is a cool villain. I'll give you that. Deborah with the stone spit. That's a cool power. That's about it. That's all I got. Sorry.
Also, Vegeta sacrificing himself.
Yeah.
It's better than Goku sacrificing himself. Only to ensure that Cell wasn't completely defeated, to help teach his son a lesson and then abandon him because he is...
Vegeta's actually felt really emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was actually like, also, holy shit. You know, I don't know, he knocks Trunks out and he's like... No.
People aren't joking about how satisfying it is to watch Vegeta develop as a father. It's one of the best parts, and that gets better in Dragon Ball Super, I find too. So at this point in the US, the original Dragon Ball had run on TV, but again, because YTV had no relationship with Funimation, they didn't have access to that dub, and they did redub the whole thing. But AB Group was still continuing on with their own versions of Dragon Ball. They went back and produced their own dub of the original Dragon Ball, which aired on YTV in 2003. Now, I know I didn't follow this one for very long. I followed it for a while. I had a lot of nostalgia for the original Dragon Ball, and in a way I was satisfied that after 8 long years, YTV was finally going to run episode 14 of Dragon Ball for the first time. But I was expecting it to be the Funimation dub, because I didn't realize that, they were doing everything with Ocean at that time. So Ocean moved the production of this from Vancouver to Calgary to save money. So everyone was completely recast, meaning that Goku had yet another voice actor. I think he was up to 6 voice actors at this point.
But it is very important for everyone listening to know that Sean Schemmel is the only true Goku.
Yeah.
According to him, at least.
The other 15 voice actors who have played Goku over the years obviously don't count. Of course, we don't know exactly what happened before Kamehameha Con. The controversy that Geoff is talking about is apparently Ian Corlett was temporarily suspended as a guest at Sean's request because Sean Schemmel allegedly believes he is the one true voice of Goku and then no one else counts.
Except for the Japanese.
Masako Nozawa, the 87-year-old woman who... the only voice actor that Goku has ever had in Japan and ever will, and probably ever will because she will live to be 120, I'm sure. And that woman, I swear to God, you think Goku screams a lot in the English dubs. The English dub voice actors complain about screaming as Goku so much, they've got nothing on her. I swear to God, this 87-year-old woman, she has to have this, maybe not the strongest vocal cords on earth, but she's top 5, for sure. She's got to be. But yeah, AB Group funded a new dub, done in Calgary Blue Water Studios. This time they didn't have access to any of the tapes, the visual tapes from Funimation. So they had to do everything like they did those last 4 episodes of Dragon Ball, everything from the French tapes. And those DBZ tapes, they looked okay, but I swear to God, now I have a few varying opinions of the Dragon Ball dub, of this Dragon Ball dub, I think, but I'm going to start with the bad first. And the worst part about this dub, by far, is the way it looked. These were done using ancient PAL tapes from the French broadcast. They were converted to NTSC by Blue Water, edited, and then reconverted for television broadcast in Canada. They even tried to apply their own digital edits to it. Any French text, there was some hard-subbed French text in this that they overlaid very sloppily with English text. The end result was horrible. Now, I've mentioned before how, like, Funny's, like, DNR stuff looks terrible if you look at it now. Back then, we were still using CRT TVs, and I was expecting to see the Funimation dub air on YTV, but, man, it was, like, kind of brutal to watch this version. I swear to God, I think this may have actually been one of the worst looking things that YTV has ever run.
You also, like, it cannot be overstated how bad the opening is.
That's the worst part.
The digitally edited opening.
Now, the opening, they use a different opening. It's actually based on the French opening. It's a dubbed version of the French opening.
Dragon Ball, la quête finale des 7 boules de cristal venues des étoiles. Dragon Ball pour un idéal, combat glacial du bien contre le mal.
It was pointed out to me, I think, by Ian at one point, that the French opening for the original Dragon Ball is actually a knockoff of the He-Man theme. It's several generations removed from all this weird shit. That opening is awful. Like, after years of waiting for the Funimation dub to air, which looks decent and has an accurate theme song compared to the original one, and just seeing that was like hugely disappointing to me. Like, I may have overreacted a little bit because there's some good points to this dub, but man, like, it is rough. It is rough, especially for 2003, which is where we are on the timeline now.
Yeah, it's ugly as hell. Or hiffle. It's ugly as hiffle.
However, and also the voice acting wasn't always great. There were some good voices, but most of them were pretty questionable. But yeah, some decent performances. But as we mentioned before, the most important part about this dub is that compared to all other televised dubs of the original Dragon Ball, this really kept most of the content in. Not only violence, and like that whole Piccolo fight at the end of the series, it is completely uncut, which is kind of shocking because that is one of the bloodiest fights in the series, and they could have edited it, and they didn't. It was kind of eye-opening and kind of makes you wonder why content that had run on YTV before was edited as much as it was. But yeah, they just kept all of it in, and more importantly, most of the sexual content was intact, especially compared to the Funimation dub that ran on Toonami in the States.
Yeah, it ended up in a later night block, and it ended up feeling more mature than Dragon Ball, like the English dub of Dragon Ball Z in a lot of ways. And that's really backwards from the experience of Dragon Ball in Japan. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing for me, they had more episodes more frequently. I remember it moved a lot faster and got to new story parts quicker than Dragon Ball did, or than Dragon Ball Z did. There was less filler in the Dragon Ball manga adaptation too, because they started 2 or 3 years after Dragon Ball was being syndicated in Japan, like the manga. So they had a lot more material to work for before they before they caught up. Part of the reason that Dragon Ball Z is so frustrating to watch is because by that time they had almost caught up to the Dragon Ball manga. And it just, I don't know, I really, really liked Dragon Ball in some ways more than Dragon Ball Z when it was airing, in spite of the many, many flaws with that dub.
I feel like I've covered all of my feelings on Dragon Ball. I wasn't super I was like into Dragon Ball, but I didn't really pick up till Z. So.
And I see you're really itching to get to GT and your boyfriend Trunks.
Excuse me. The fuck did you just fucking say about me, you little?
I'm keeping that in.
That's fine.
So I caught a fair bit of this dub. I didn't watch the whole thing. I think it only had like 1 or 2 hiatuses. You're right. They got through it way quicker. I think the whole thing was delivered to YTV when it was finished, pretty much. Like I mentioned, the amount of sexual content that was kept in was surprising. The fight with Ranfan, where she like strips down to her underwear, that was edited quite a bit in the US version. It was that whole thing was completely uncut in the version that aired on YTV. And surprisingly, even the scene with the Invisible Man, where Krillin pulls down Bulma's top to cause Roshi to have a giant nosebleed to cover the Invisible Man so that they can see him and defeat him. That was like they did not fundamentally change what happened in that scene, if I remember it correctly. You didn't see the actual offending act, but like they didn't hide the fact that this was blood coming from Master Roshi's nose, which is kind of surprising. I think the Funimation version went to a bizarre extent to try and re-script that whole bit.
One other thing that I distinctly remember from the dub of Dragon Ball that I really liked was Launch. They did a really good job of dubbing Launch and her like personality change, and I just really liked her character in general a lot. And I missed her when I went back to Z.
Those last few scenes she gets in the Saiyan saga in the anime, they're really great, because in the manga, Toriyama just kind of throws out this thing with her being in love with Ten Shinhan, and it's not explored at all in the manga. It's just kind of thrown out there and then dropped. But they do a little bit with it in the Saiyan arc, and it's really nice to see, and it's always kind of disheartening to see it cut out in like Kai and kind of overlooked now. But yeah, she's really the forgotten character of the franchise.
Yeah.
She really is. And I mean, angry blonde ladies, Krillin's certainly got a type.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I think the Piccolo arc is probably I think it might be my favorite like kind of segment in all of Dragon Ball, because that's when like the world building really gets serious and believable. The stakes really start to rise. And the fighting is not all laser beams yet. There's actually still some real martial arts action. And also the moment when Goku penetrates through Demon Lord Piccolo's chest. It's worth noting in the manga, that scene is like, I think it's the only full page spread that Toriyama does. And it's a really significant moment because it kind of marks the moment where Goku becomes the strongest being on Earth, essentially. And I really like that bit. And like the whole thing's uncut in the Blue Water dub, which is great. But it really shows how unfortunate it is that really we had to experience this part of Dragon Ball after Dragon Ball Z, because after reading the manga from front to back, I can safely say this story is infinitely superior when you read the whole thing in order. Like, you appreciate everything in the Z saga, or the Z arc, so much more when you have the context of Dragon Ball behind it. Like, you understand who Korin is, who Ten Shinhan is, who Tao Pai Pai is, all these characters who pop up randomly in Z. You get all this context, you appreciate it more. If you haven't experienced everything in order, I highly recommend it. But yeah, so in addition to the Dragon Ball dub that Blue Water Studios made for AB Group and was distributed to YTV through Ocean, they also did a separate dub from Dragon Ball GT. Now, I have nothing to say about this. I watched like the first episode. Infamously, the Funimation dub it skipped 16 episodes, did a lot of more localization, had the rap opening.
I loved the rap opening.
I'm a big fan personally of the it's the one opening that we got that was better than the American opening. I think the in another time and place. It feels very like 90s rock or whatever. I really liked it.
They Funimation uploaded that rap to their website, and at the time, my sister had an MP3 player, so she used her MP3 player to record it for me off of Funimation's website. Like, she held her MP3 player up to the speaker, and we listened to it on Funimation's website, and then she plugged her MP3 player in and took the file off of her MP3 player and put it onto a CD for me. So I could listen to the opening, that shitty rap, over and over again on recorded MP3 player quality. I loved that rap.
Yeah, basically, like, your entire, like, that year was just
stepping into the Grand Tour.
Welcome to the Grand Tour.
Yep.
Dragon Ball GT.
Yes.
Man.
I didn't like the Canadian opening, that song. I didn't like it.
I really liked it. It was like very fun and adventurous. The thing is, I really do feel like the Grand Tour rap lies to the audience about what Dragon Ball GT is. Because Dragon Ball GT is like, to me, as somebody who liked original Dragon Ball, I would say almost more than I liked Dragon Ball Z watching it. I really like the return to the adventurousness of Dragon Ball. Obviously, there are problems with GT.
Yeah, they tried to sell GT as being more hardcore than it was.
Which it's more hardcore than Z.
Yeah,
which is the opposite.
The entire Funimation
Yeah,
localization, it's a deception. It's trying to recontextualize the show.
The other thing about GT, like I think that the ocean dub of GT is pretty solid. By that point, they were also improving, cause they'd been with the series for a while. So it didn't feel like as much of a step down in terms of polish. And as far as GT's story goes, I'm probably gonna get hung for this, or hanged for this. Hung is different. I'm gonna get hanged for this, but I kind of think that in some ways, Dragon Ball GT is a better follow-up to the story of Dragon Ball Z up to the Cell Saga than either the Buu Saga or Super. Not counting the movies, because I think that the movies are really good.
I mean, to be fair, Super, for the first part of it, is basically the movies, just redone.
Yeah, yes. And I mean, when Super is bringing in old Dragon Ball Z villains, or doing world building in that way that connects to Goku, I think it works. But when it's just like, here's a random guy from another universe who is just very strong and Goku's very strong and they gotta fight each other, or this guy's a god who took Goku's body so that he could be Goku strong and now they gotta beat Goku. That stuff doesn't feel as connected as in GT, as dumb as GT is, and I cannot emphasize dumb enough. The one thing that I really appreciate that they did is the Tuffles, really dumb name, but the Tuffle race having that connection to the Saiyans, and being one of the first races that the Saiyans conquered, and having that like lust for revenge is like a really interesting way of connecting to the backstory of Goku and providing a bit of closure on his rivalry with Vegeta by giving them a common enemy, and then that common enemy possesses Vegeta, and you've got that who's stronger thing. There's a lot of like interesting stuff there. And then the Super 17 saga again is like they bring back, Dr. Gero and all of that, and again there's that connection to the past, and then it gets really stupid with the evil dragons. There's like a lot of stupid stuff there, but the idea of every wish that they've ever made on the Dragon Balls coming back to haunt them in a physical way is, I think, really cool, and it feels more like a reflection of the legacy that Dragon Ball had compared to Super, where it's like, here's a guy from a completely different dimension, and you got to fight him in this tournament, or the whole universe.
I do appreciate how Dragon Ball GT, as bad as those later story arcs are, how it brings the focus back to the Dragon Balls, which have just become just a complete background thing that's taken for granted at this point.
I think that's part of them trying to bring it back to the feeling of an adventure to different places, and less like a series of fights. Yeah, I think GT gets a bit of a bad rap, but at the same time it deserves a lot of it because the writing is much weaker than it is in other parts of the series.
One thing that I kind of liked about GT, and it was a little disappointing, but for the most part I tried to force myself to like, was Pan. I didn't get a chance to throw it in there earlier when we were talking about the beginning of the Buu Saga, but Videl as a character was like super, super important, at least to me, and I think the other small female audience, because it was the first time they put a female in the show who could actually do something. Like, yeah, Bulma was smart and sassy, but she wasn't strong. She couldn't fight with them. She could sass alongside with them and say, she could make cool things, but for someone who wasn't smart, like me, she wasn't someone you could like look at and be like, damn, I love her. She's like an inspirational character.
And Chi-Chi had been sidelined for a long time
Chi-Chi
ago.
was just the wife.
Yeah.
Chi-Chi was out of the picture as soon as Dragon Ball, and she was in it, but she was no longer. She was a mom. Mm-hmm. She was also a mom who was kind of
the same happened with Android 17, but you know, she never wanted to be a warrior to begin with. That's something that was always kind of forced on her. So,
but also she was at this point still kind
of
a bad guy, you know. It was just the beginning of that arc where you saw her. She, you know, she wasn't someone you could be like a hero when you look at them. So Videl was the first person who was like, and also she wasn't special. I mean, yeah, she was special from like a human standpoint, but she wasn't an alien. She wasn't a robot. She was just a girl who was like really passionate about fighting and worked really, really hard to be good at fighting. She didn't have any like, besides being Mr. Satan's daughter, she didn't have any like special power that made her strong. So I was like desperately looking for another character to love like I loved her. And I was really looking forward to Pan. Like, even though Pan is half Saiyan, she's still pretty close to being like a normal person. And then they made her like kind of a whiny teenager. Like, I kind of liked how I guess inconsistent she was at first, because that was accurate for a teenage girl. But then they just kind of made her shitty and not as powerful as I was hoping she would be, and she was just kind of a...
She was there in addition to Trunks and
She was still a girl who got hurt easily.
Yeah.
She was still a girl who cried over
It's interesting how they always point out in Dragon Ball Z, and this is a kind of a refreshing thing about Saiyans, is having mixed blood actually makes them more powerful, which is really refreshing compared to like usual mythology of things, is that being
mixed doesn't make you good.
Having pure blood is what makes you stronger. That makes Pan especially disappointing in that regard. Yeah,
they kind of start on that with Vegeta.
Yeah,
Vegeta believes that you know, Gohan's not a pure Saiyan,
so he's not as strong.
Yeah.
But they retconned that recently, actually. With the S cells thing. I don't know if you guys have heard of. So apparently there's these cells that gentle Saiyans have that let them turn into Super Saiyans, and those can be, the prevalence of S cells determines how powerful a Saiyan is, and those can be inherited. So now the reason that all of the mixed blood Saiyans are more powerful is because they inherited their father's S cell counts. It's kind of silly.
So midichlorians, basically. I guess the only thing I can say about Dragon Ball GT is that for all its flaws, it's important to keep in mind that there was, like, when it was airing in Japan, there was no break between Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball GT. Dragon Ball GT started the week after Dragon Ball Z ended, with basically the same staff. So they were basically flying by the seat of their pants. They had they didn't have like 15 years to prepare like they did for Dragon Ball Super, and like being able to extensively test what people are going to like and what they're not going to like. So I mean, Dragon Ball GT is kind of bold when you think of it that way.
GT also wasn't very cool, arguably. Like, trying to talk to your friend or convince your friend to watch something with a villain named Baby.
Yeah.
Is like the biggest, you know, the big bad of this arc is Baby.
Yeah.
You know, trying to sell your 11, 10-year-old friends on that.
And looks wise, as much as I like the concept of Super 17, just 17 with much longer hair and bigger eyebrows.
A bigger brow bone, yeah.
Since we're on it, Super Saiyan 4 looks so stupid.
So yes, one thing about that there's no point in me saying this, I just want to throw it out there because I love it about GT. I don't know what it was a game, I think it was the walkthrough, not the walkthrough, but like the game, not guide, but like the thing kids who were really into a game used to read. It wasn't a guide, it was like an info book for kids who were super into it. Mm-hmm. And it had like, here's these cool secrets in the game. It was one of those for Budokai, and it came with a disc.
The strategy guide.
Yes, yeah, there we go, strategy guide. It wasn't like a walkthrough, but it was like, you know, you're really into it. I couldn't think of that. It came with one episode of GT as like a preview, and it was the episode where they open up the hole to hell, and Frieza comes back, and Cell comes back, and all of the villains descend on the city, and Goku is like bullied by Frieza and Cell. I thought that was like the greatest episode of that show. I don't know why. I have absolutely no justification for why I loved that episode, but that disc was like my most treasured object. I watched that episode over and over again.
It's really fun to watch Frieza and Cell interact.
Yeah, it was like refreshing to see them be kind of like a comedy duo together.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they weren't quite as serious and stuff.
I mean, I do love what they've done with Frieza in the new series.
Oh my god. Frieza in the newest, especially in the newest movie, is this reference might be lost on you guys. Hopefully someone watching will get this, but he seems like the kind of guy who would win a season of RuPaul's Drag Race. He's the right kind of sass monster.
Yeah.
Who I fear because he's gonna say something that's gonna hurt me so deep because it's so clever. You know?
Yeah.
He seems like the kind of guy who would say something out of pure sass that just cuts you so deep. You're like, wow. You're like, that just judged me so hard. I like how sassy Frieza became.
Mm-hmm. He's really catty and mean.
Yeah, they realized he couldn't be that scary anymore.
Yeah.
So they were like, let's just make him a bitch.
Any other final thoughts on GT?
Super Saiyan 4 looks really stupid.
I tried so hard to think Super Saiyan 4 looked cool. I convinced myself. I was like, yeah, the red monkey hair.
He has a vest made of his own chest hair.
No, it's made of monkey hair. And it's red. Why was it red? And why did they get red eyeliner? There were so many questions.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and it's really dumb. Like, the Super Saiyan Great Ape is at least like a continuation of the escalation of what has come before. But I think that, like, you look at Super Saiyan 4 Goku with, again, the shirt that's made of hair, and that just looks gross on a person. You know, it looks like your dad coming out of, a hard workout with, like, this mat of chest hair, and he's like, and they're trying to make that cool.
I feel like I can smell
yeah.
Like, thinking about how gross and sweaty their weird monkey fur must get when they're fighting.
Yeah, oh god. Oh. That does make me uncomfortable. I'm like, ugh.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of other things. There was a lot of GT things I thought when I watched GT. A lot of people had a lot of negative feelings about Gohan turning into a nerd. Like a real nerd, like with his, not like when he was in high school where he was like a cool nerd who happened to be good at sports. I've seen a lot of people be like, they gave up on Gohan and, turned him into a book nerd. And I was like, I kind of liked that. I kind of thought
you would.
Stop. No, I mean, I thought that was a cool progression for him, that they didn't decide that maybe he should be the cool guy. I just kind of liked that they kept him. They went balls deep with his nerdiness.
I think it represents one thing I really like about Dragon Ball is how the status quo is constantly changing in unexpected ways, right down to the direction that certain characters go in.
In the end, he turned into the boy his mom wanted him to be.
Yeah.
She could have just let it happen and he would have turned into her ideal son.
Mm-hmm. It just took a while.
But no, I mean, if she just went hands off, he probably still would have turned into that perfect son.
He starts turning into that nerd in the Buu Saga when he's going to high school.
Yeah, no, I mean, they didn't decide to ditch that. Because they kind of start to make him a little cool when they start to unlock his power with the sword. Yeah. They kind of start to lean into maybe he's still kind of cool. He's got a cool outfit and a cool sword.
But then they subvert it, and it's
That's
great.
what I mean. That's what I mean, is they decided to just keep going with it. And I was like, thank you if you're going to make things up, thank you for not messing with that. Goten got to be cool.
Yeah.
But cool in quotations.
Cool. Yeah, I like what they did with Gohan, afterwards, because I think that that's the only way they could take his character, really, because he had like this arc of like stepping into his dad's shoes and saving the world, and when they decided they were going to continue the story with Goku coming back, he couldn't just keep being more Goku.
Another non-important thing that needs to be discussed about GT is Vegeta's mustache, as he calls it. Do you remember that? And how it made no sense? How he was suddenly able to grow hair on his face?
But he's got that in Super, too.
Why does that doesn't make sense? How is he? Do they explain it in Super? Do they explain how he suddenly grows facial hair?
I guess he's just stopped shaving it?
We assume they shave it while
that's true. Like, he should have been able to grow facial hair before. But I mean, Nappa had a goatee, so Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Nappa did have that.
Nappa had his Goku.
And he didn't have it when he was younger
Yeah.
when they showed him, did he? Or did he? No, I think he did have it in the movie when he was...
Yeah, I think
he had it still then too. But anyway, I just thought that was the most pointless thing they could have included, was him getting bullied by his own daughter for having facial hair, and then he comes out and doesn't have facial hair. That was the greatest piece of Vegeta character development.
That's the kind of shit I love. I like just Vegeta just trying to be a cool dad.
Yeah, no, I love that he thinks his daughter is the greatest thing on the planet. Like, I think that was so unexpected, or kind of unexpected.
That he pampers the hell out of Bra.
Because of how much he hated Trunks. You know what I mean? How shitty of a dad he was towards Trunks most of the time. It was, like, kind of funny to see.
You remember when
Especially because Goku never got a girl, you know?
Yeah.
So to see one of them be, like, a softie was like, oh.
Remember when we watched the recent Broly movie, and it's just like, Goku's like, come on, you gotta do it for your precious wife and your daughter Beulah. And he's like, yes, I agree. And it's like, what about Trunks?
Right? He's like, I gotta do it for her. And it's like, what about your other child?
But Goku wouldn't think of a son.
Yeah, Goku wouldn't think of a single child. But also, Vegeta has a lot of, like, moments that they slowly build up of him being, like, a better human than Goku. Like, when he defends Bulma, sometime during the Buu Saga, when they're up with the Kais, Goku offers a kiss from Bulma to the old Kai.
In the original version, he said old Kai could grope Bulma. Which makes Goku look even worse. Yeah.
In the anime, that makes more sense too about why Vegeta would freak out about it, because he like loses. Yeah. I thought that was I don't know, the slow progression that Vegeta has of truly being a better human than Goku. He may not be as powerful, but he's a better dad and a better husband and a better human.
Well, he's a Saiyan.
It's a very low bar.
Yeah, Yeah, you know what I mean. But his human qualities, he makes a better human than
a
Goku.
better person.
Yeah.
So after Dragon Ball GT ended, that's when YTV, got into Bionics, and then Dragon Ball has kind of faded from at least mainstream Canadian media. Dragon Ball Kai, of course, which is the edited version of Dragon Ball, did come. It aired on Nicktoons in the United States at first, an edited version. It wasn't too badly edited. Interestingly, though, the visual edits that were made to Dragon Ball Kai were done by Ocean Studios. Again, still keeping their fingers in that pie. That version did not air in Canada, though. If you lived near somewhere that had a CW station, you may have seen the heavily edited 4Kids version of Dragon Ball Kai airing on their Toonzai block, where I think most people know that as the version where Mr. Popo was painted blue, which, I guess I can kind of understand why you'd want to try to do something about Mr. Popo.
Yeah.
That's something I never thought about at all when I was a kid. It never occurred to me, that particular aspect of that character. And going back and reading Dragon Ball, you see that, I don't think Akira Toriyama is trying to be racist in the way that he draws black people, because I think he's legitimately trying to produce depict diversity in his work, but that's just in the environment he grew up in. Just that's how he understood that you draw a cartoon of a black person. But yeah, Mr. Popo.
Yeah, Mr. Popo. Mr. Popo and General Black from the Red Ribbon Army.
Oh yeah.
I mean, also Jinx from Pokemon. There was a whole thing there
where for some reason they was still open season
and also the Native American kid in Dragon Ball, in original Dragon Ball, who just lives in a teepee and has one feather on it. There's a lot of stuff in original Dragon Ball, especially, that it's eyebrows raised. And Mr. Popo's the only one who's stuck around from that point forward. But that's not okay. That would not fly if they tried to dub that this year. I don't think.
Oh yeah, no way. Popo, I don't think would have even made it.
Mr. Popo was fortunate to first appear in the dub back in the 90s when we didn't see race and racism didn't exist anymore. So it seemed benign back then.
Yeah, nobody was...
Everyone was pretending that it was okay.
He just got grandfathered in.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Oh.
But anyway, apart from that, Dragon Ball kind of disappeared from Canada at that point, but it still had a lot of pop culture significance in kind of unexpected ways. I think DBZ Abridged was probably one of the most prominent examples of that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh no, Abridged was just like that thing that re-sparked my interest in DBZ again.
For me too, yeah.
I have like a very vivid memory of sitting in my 10th grade law class with the only other person I knew that vaguely cared about Dragon Ball Z anymore, and I was sitting on my iPod Touch that I had preloaded some stuff on when we were away for lunch. I had preloaded a video for us to watch during this goddamn shit class, and we were back there splitting a headphone watching this episode, and it was episode 2 of theirs. Was the first one we saw, and we got in so much trouble during that class because we would not stop watching it and literally laughing like extremely loud, and then we had no respect. I had zero respect as a high
It's
school
Canadian
kid.
law. It's fine.
It's fine. It's not real.
It's not real law.
But yeah, I have this like crazy memory of watching that and thinking this is the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. We like couldn't believe it. And it was something we talked about all the time, too, because we thought it was so funny, and it became something that I regularly watched. And now sometimes some of my memories of Dragon Ball Z are wrong. Because I forget that didn't actually happen. You know, I forgot that they made that joke up for Abridged and it wasn't real.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the jokes in Abridged are iconic. Mm-hmm. It's hilarious, and I will quote everything they say. Abridged, I kind of feel like Abridged is, to a certain extent, responsible for keeping the hype up between the end of Dragon Ball airing on TV
and it coming back.
Yeah,
no, absolutely. I think they kept that entire fandom alive and going. It kept reminding people that it was good and that it was there, and it made people were looking forward to their episodes, mm-hmm. which kept them hyped up for real Dragon Ball.
Yeah,
you know, and it's cool that some of the people involved with Dragon Ball Z actually recognize that they were influential in keeping Dragon Ball Z important, mm-hmm. or keeping the Dragon Ball franchise important. It's cool that they kind of get a little tiny drop of recognition for that.
Yeah, Chris Sabat gives them a lot of respect for their work, and
which they deserve. I think that they really
tried to use them in an episode of Dragon Ball Z. Dragon Ball Super, but that wound up getting cut at the last minute. Yeah.
Yep, we heard about that.
Toei was like, nope, you're not allowed to do that.
It ended up somewhere, though.
It ended up on...
Because I've heard it before. It was on YouTube for a while, and it was like accidentally... I don't know what happened, but I've heard it before. Mm-hmm. But also...
Weren't they... I feel like they might have been integrated into one of the late dub episodes of Kai, because there's...
Or something. I feel like I've heard it before. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm really wrong, but I swear I heard it.
I could have sworn that there's a bit in Kai where Hercule creates a movie version of his fight against Cell.
And they use their voice. But didn't they actually air that anyway?
That was in the Buu Saga. I think they weren't able to air it with the voices though. Toei was like, no, these people.
Oh right, I'm sorry. Yeah, this was in Kai, not in Super. Yeah.
Yeah. For Kai, this was the redoing. Yeah. I don't know. I swear I've heard it. Maybe I haven't heard it. Everything they do is great. I'm glad they're still going to keep going too. Mm-hmm. I very much look forward to their Saiyaman.
The Saiyaman saga from them is going to be fantastic.
I cannot wait. That's going to be so good. It's like just pure joke fodder.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
The entire time.
So now, we've been getting the movies now, which has probably been the biggest, cultural presence of Dragon Ball anywhere in a long time. Toei did put out that OVA back in 2008 with like Vegeta's brother.
Oh my god,
yeah,
the little
it's
one?
Not recommended.
There's Vegeta's brother. There was also the manga, the spin-off manga that he did where it's Space Patrolman Jacko. Mm-hmm. And he's going off on all these crazy adventures with a human woman and another alien. And then at the end, he meets up with the woman's sister, and it's Bulma right before the start of Dragon Ball. So that was like the two threads of Dragon Ball existing. before we went into the...
But yeah, so that brings us to the point we're at now with, these movies have been extremely successful, especially Brawly, which at the time of recording just came out a few months ago. So in your opinion, because I know we don't have Super isn't on TV or on like a major streaming service here. So, it's something you very much have to try to seek out if you want to see it. It's not something, it should be on, I wish it was on television or on Crave or something like that, where more people could see it. But it's something you have to dig for.
That was the most Canadian thing you've ever said.
Crave.
Crave is Canadian.
Yeah. Hey.
Hulu for all you Americans.
But, so what do you guys think? Do you think that Dragon Ball is still like a living, breathing phenomenon here like it is in like US and Japan? Or is it still more of a nostalgic throwback?
I do know a lot of people in Canada who are still keeping up with it.
It lasted a really long time in Canadian theaters too. The movie, the recent
Yeah.
movie, that movie was in Canadian theaters for like 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, we caught it like 2 weeks after
2.5 weeks, I think. So we went on a Wednesday. So
yeah,
it was, I mean, I figured Canadian theaters is the first place it's going to leave. So.
And it was pretty full for Resurrection F and Battle of the Gods. I remember when I went to see those, I went out to a theater in Coquitlam to watch them, the big VIP one, and it was pretty well packed for both showings of that. I think that the hype around Dragon Ball still very much exists in Canada. Not maybe to the same extent in the US where it is airing on Toonami, but I don't think that that wall is as high as it used to be. I think a lot of people are just tuning into it on Crunchyroll, like a lot more people than you would expect, or on Funimation streaming platform if they want to do that for the dub. Yes, I as I understand it, Super is as popular as Dragon Ball's ever been. Really.
Yeah. Again, you're right. It's definitely not as strong as the US because we don't have that Toonami thing. We don't have the people who don't go out of their way to stream stuff watching it. They've got that separate market of people who use their televisions.
It's more people than you think.
But yeah, that's what I mean. Is they've got like a whole bonus market of people who just tune in because it's on TV, but wouldn't go out of their way otherwise, and they like it. But yeah, I still think it's going strong in Canada, just not quite as strong.
It could be better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, the U.S. market's enough to carry it forever. Considering, like, if you look on YouTube, every single episode that airs, there's like 10 Dragon Ball YouTubers who each put out a video about it and like a speculation video in between that.
And they all get amazing views,
200,000 views easy, like
with each episode. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane how hyped people are about Dragon Ball still.
Yeah.
Just maybe that hasn't come to Canada as much as it is in the US.
I think it's because of the Toonami thing, personally. But that's like our only barrier. Is that people can't be reminded. They have to.
Even if it was on YTV, that would be something.
Yeah. I mean, there is the WoW World channel that's going to be launching in April, and we still don't know what's going to be on that channel. But there's been like a lot of apparently they're looking so going back to what I said before about Ocean doing those visual edits for Dragon Ball Kai, they also did their own dub of Dragon Ball Kai like 8 years ago, reuniting most of those voice actors, and that dub apparently it was also financed by AB Group. But a lot has changed since then. Toei pretty much has direct control over everything, and no one really knows why this was made or why it was never released, and why it was just put into a vault. But, probably because they thought they could distribute it, and it turns out they didn't. That's my guess. But apparently, it's very likely that even though Dragon Ball Kai is kind of an old news at this point, it might be showing up on that WoW World. Apparently they are looking into trying getting that weird artifact of a lost dub. It would be interesting. Cool. I mean, it would get them like international publicity if they got this weird old dub on there, and I would hope that would lead to them getting Super if that did happen. I was hoping that they would have some kind of programming announcement ready for the station before we did this episode, but they're cutting it close. We'll see. Maybe something will come up while I'm editing this. Which
maybe they'll get the Harmony Gold dub of Dragon Ball. I now that you said that exists, I really want to see it.
So I think that wraps us up. Where can people find you guys online?
You can find me at youtube.com/mothersbasement, where I do videos about anime every single week, at least one, sometimes two. You can also find me on Twitter at G0FFTHEW, a username that I really need to change, because it's at Geoff, but that's about it, for my main social media accounts.
And you can find me easiest on Twitter, Tenleid, Tenleid. That's where I post all my stuff. I'm a costhot who posts pictures of their costumes all day. And their cats. That's about it. Kitties and titties.
Kitties and titties.
Okay.
Great
Kitties and
advertising.
titties. That is the content of my stuff.
And thanks for tuning into Zonan Canada. You can reach me on Twitter at jbetteridge or email zonancanada@gmail.com. The theme song is by Ultraclystron and can be found on his album Packet Flood, and you can find that at his website, ultraclystron.com. Please subscribe to this show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, or your podcast app of choice. If you do want to find more of the retrospectives I've done, Goldorak, The Bush Baby, Gundam Seed, Gundam Wing, all these other shows that have had some kind of cultural impact in Canada, if you just go to zonin.ca, the main website for my podcast, you'll find them listed on the right-hand side. I recently interviewed Caitlin Bairstow, Matthew Erickson, Raj Ramaya, even older interviews like PJ Phil Guerrero and Sugar from The Zone. You can find it all, again, on that right-hand sidebar at zonin.ca. If you know anyone who might like this show, please recommend it to them. See you again.
Trying to save the world with all my friends, making the boy a man again. It's a desperate search all across the universe. We've got to find them all. Gotta find those Dragon Balls. Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball
All right. Goku is such a wild man. Check him out.
Korin!
What?
I need some Senzu beans!
Right. These are my last two, Goku. Catch.
Got him! Thanks, Korin!